Naš jezik je na kanalu broj 1, engleski na kanalu broj 2. U toku panela imat ćemo...
And during the panel debate, we will have two panels and between them short break. The questions from our audience, Zoom audience, will come through the chat, but if you are in the room, you can ask for the floor to comment or ask questions, but we are quite limited with time, so please do not be too long. Our colleagues will come to you and hand over the mic. May I ask to get a signal when we are ready to go online. Good morning to our guests in Sarajevo and all of you who follow us through Zoom, and also those who follow us on the Facebook page of the EU delegation. Welcome to the event Integrity and Fight Against Corruption, organized together by the General Directorate for Neighborhood and Enlargement and the EU delegation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. May I welcome all our panelists and all of you who will join us through video link. May I also welcome other guests, young activists, professors and analysts, and who will certainly participate in today's discussion. At the beginning, only a couple of technical information. As you may see, all of you present here and those who follow us on link, today's event is organized in compliance with all precautionary measures in an adapted hall, and our audience will follow us through the Zoom platform, while the debate is broadcast through the Facebook page of EU delegation. This unfortunately means that we could not invite a huge number of participants to this debate, as usually is the case. But thanks to this up-to-date technology, other panelists will participate through Zoom, and we have several hundred of followers on the Zoom platform. I will keep informing you on the numbers. 135 of those who follow us on Zoom. Representatives of young people, business community, media will also take part in this debate. Of course, I invite the audience to ask questions through the chat function, and we will forward them or communicate them to our panelists. You can use the language option which is appropriate for you, and we will retain the right to group questions, repetitive questions. We will discuss today integrity and fight against the corruption. These are two narrowly linked terms, notions, which affect the life and work of citizens to a great extent. The integrity of public officials and judicial officials is essential for the rule of law. On the other hand, the destructive force of corruption adversely affects the daily life of our citizens in education, equal opportunities, and jobs created. We must look at this in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a negative phenomena which affects the society at large. Therefore, we must be vigilant and seek preventing corruption. Bosnia and Herzegovina is on its path to EU integration, and this is why this is even more important. Bosnia and this was noted in the so-called BiH report and recently published report, country report 2020. All these reports stress the importance of the rule of law. To this end, may I invite you to hear the message from Mr. Varhelyi, Commissioner for Enlargement and Neighborhood. Poštovani učesnici, veliko mi je zadovoljstvo da otvorim ovu drugu debatu o pravu na pravdu. Veoma sam sretan što se uprkos situaciji izazvanoj COVID-19 mogli organizovati ovaj dijalog. Govorit ćemo o trenutnoj prioritetima vladavine prava u ovoj zemlji. To je jedan proces u kojem moramo posebno naglasiti reformu i demokratsku transformaciju. To znači vladavinu prava, ali i borbu protiv korupcije u institucijama. I kako sam naglasio tokom posjete Bosni i Hercegovini prošli mjesec, Zapadni Balkan, zemlje Zapadnog Balkana su prioritet za Evropsku komisiju i za mene lično. Bosna i Hercegovina ima jasne perspektive priključivanja Evropskoj uniji, ali čelnici moraju voditi i predvoditi primjerom i biti u potpunosti posvećeni vrijednostima na kojima je zasnovana Evropska unija. Ukoliko Bosna i Hercegovina uradi svoj zadatak i Evropska unija će odgovoriti adekvatno. Tokom za period nakon pandemije Evropska unija je pripremila pomoć za Bosnu i Hercegovinu i za oporavak Bosne i Hercegovine. Također je pripremljen program za Zapadni Balkan, program investicija za zemlje Zapadnog Balkana, ali to se mora odvijeti zajedno sa provedbom reforma. Bez obzira da li se radi o strukturalnim ili drugim promjenama, o jačanju javne uprave, ove su reforme od suštinskog značaja za poduzetništvo, za nova radna.
Obstructions to judicial reforms from political actors and from the judiciary undermine the citizens' rights and confidence and the fight against corruption. In the past few months, we have seen some positive developments in addressing the 14 key priorities. Let me stress, in particular, the breakthrough on elections in Mostar. Now it is the time to work hard to restore the trust in the judicial system, strengthen integrity, and fight corruption. Only by delivering on a critical mass of reforms will Bosnia and Herzegovina advance towards the candidate status. This public debate is a unique opportunity to engage and contribute to the current rule of law priorities in your country. I encourage you to fully grasp this opportunity here, today, but also beyond the confines of this forum in your everyday life. I wish you a very productive and fruitful debate.
Hvala gospodinu Varheliju.
Thank you, Mr. Varhelyi, for your message, and I keep receiving messages. Right now, we have around 180 followers and hundreds and more on the Facebook, and these numbers are going up minute after minute. And I hope that the panelists and our discussion will be very interesting, and you stay with us until the end. You can always join through the Zoom chat option and send us questions. Now I will ask His Excellency Ambassador Johan Sattler from the EU delegation to address us. Ambassador, please, the floor is yours.
Dear ministers, high judicial office holders, dear colleagues, ambassadors, dear citizens, it was exactly a year ago when we met 100 meters from here in the Parliament building to have a very lively, a very interactive debate on the state of rule of law in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We called it Pravo na pravdu. Now, what happened since then? It's a year later. What happened? On a positive front, and I'm somebody who likes to look on progress, who also always encourages. On the positive front, and you've just heard it from the Commissioner mentioning the general progress on some of the 14 key priorities. This is very positive, started by the presidency, which came together in April and said we need to answer what our citizens want. They want European Union membership, they want progress, so let's work on these 14 key priorities. Since then, as Mr. Varhe mentioned, Mostar, next month, for the first time after 12 years, 100,000 people can go to the polls. This is big. Apart from that, we have also seen some other steps on the Stabilization Association Committee, and a few more. This is positive. What is negative? On the rule of law, and this is our topic here today, we haven't seen any progress. Rather the contrary, on some fields we have seen backsliding. This has been clearly stated by the different reports. The latest one, the country report on Bosnia and Herzegovina from the European Commission, which came out last month, which was clear. Some told me we were brutally clear. I think we have to be brutally clear. It's enough. We don't have the luxury beating around the bush. Things are as they are, and they're not good. This is also confirmed, and this is equally important, by what your citizens think about the state of the rule of law. We commissioned a study which came out last week. There are a number of figures in there. Let me just give you one. 68%, more than 2/3 of the population of this country do not have any trust to the judiciary on any level. 68%, more than 2/3 of the citizens. So a great deal remains to be done for BiH to regain citizens' trust in the judiciary. In this sense, I welcome the presence today of the ministers, of high judicial office holders. Their presence allows them to hear and to respond to the concerns from both experts and public, and hopefully resulting also in action. The main message I took away from last year's discussion are still valid, and therefore the main topics for today's discussion. One, there can be no justice without integrity of the judiciary. And two, all must work towards zero corruption. Regrettably, the 2020 country report I just mentioned before confirmed the consistent and legitimate demand of BiH citizens for real progress in tackling corruption, and this has not been met. This was also reflected in the results of the opinion poll I just mentioned before. Based on the survey, half of BiH citizens think that bribery and abuse of power for personal gain are widespread in courts. The figure here is 56% of the population thinks that it's widespread in the courts, and in the public prosecution, a little less, but still 47% of the population think there is abuse of power in the prosecution. Yesterday, the OSCE mission revealed an overall worsening of the performance of both judges and prosecutors when it comes to the processing of serious cases of corruption. And no, it's not a black and white. It's not only bad apples. I've been meeting, when going around, courageous prosecutors. I've been meeting good judges throughout the country, people who want to do something, who want to change the system, but the overall situation is bleak. Over the years, the European Union has provided substantial financial support for the modernization of the BiH judiciary, enabling its digital transformation. We renovated or built new courthouses and contributed to backlog reduction, just to name a few. However, despite the continuous EU technical and financial assistance, and many other donors are coming here as well, EU member states and other countries and organizations, the reform drive has slowed down in the recent years. The survey results also confirm that 8 out of 10 citizens feel that the justice system in BiH has not improved over the last 5 years. As I've indicated publicly to the HJPC, it's not reasonable to keep investing in the assistance if it doesn't yield reforms. The trend of no progress has to be reversed. This is no longer a question of hardware. This is about the culture inside the institutions. This is also what Mr. Priebe famously last year said. It's about change in the judicial culture, which needs to happen. A number of immediate steps in ensuring integrity are therefore crucial, and let me go through them. Adopting a set of amendments to the law of the HJPC that will enable proper integrity checks of HJPC members, chief prosecutors, and presidents of the courts, and pave the way for establishing an effective system of asset declaration checks throughout the judiciary. This is very, very, very important. Setting up, and this is my second point, setting up a professional integrity unit within HJPC Secretariat with strong external and independent monitoring to make this process credible, and C, adopting a new law on prevention of the conflict of interest in BiH institutions. Comprehensive rules on the conflicts of interest for holders of public office lead to more trust, greater accountability, more integrity, less unethical behavior, and reduction of corruption. Of course, amending and enacting legislation won't by itself eradicate corruption, but will allow progressive and reform-oriented forces to resume the fight against corruption that stands between BiH progress on the EU integration path and the right of citizens for more prosperity. And by the way, this was also the message of a very high-level visitor we had 3 days ago, High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, Mr. Borrell, while stating and expressing his strong commitment for this country, for the region, for Bosnia and Herzegovina to move forward, to help also, to give a hand in reforming its system, to give a hand in making the country more functional. Apart from that, he was very clear when it comes to the rule of law. There will be no discount. There will be no discount, and there needs to be, and the Commissioner just said that 5 minutes ago, we need to see progress on the rule of law for the next step, which is the candidate status of BiH. Moreover, there are comprehensive international standards as well as recommendations from the Council of Europe's GRECO group that must be implemented with a sense of urgency. We will hear today more on them during today's debate from GRECO's Executive Secretary, and thank you for joining as well as many other international experts who are with us today. But allow me just to stress here some of the practical and detailed steps that are required. First, putting in place robust provisions to protect whistleblowers. This we see in all our European Union countries, how important it is to have a proper protection of these people. Introducing measures to prevent political influence or bureaucratic interference in investigations. Sorry. And breaking the link between office bearers and organized crime by supporting proactive investigations, confirmed indictments, prosecutions, and final convictions. Besides, the Office of the Disciplinary Prosecutor needs an increased independence and autonomy with respect to the HTPC. This office is one of the leaders in the number of disciplinary indictments amongst Council of Europe countries, but there is ultimately a poor track record of deterrent sanctions, especially in high-profile cases by the HTPC's disciplinary panels. Taken together, these steps are vital for restoring citizens' confidence in the justice system. Public anger with the lack of progress in fighting corruption was very much in evidence earlier this year when the media broke a story of the alleged misuse of public funds intended for the procurement of desperately needed resources to fight COVID-19. The cases revealed the ugly reality of individuals apparently prepared to seek profit even in the most difficult circumstances of a global health crisis, and inadequacy of provisions in place to prevent them from such a crime against the citizens of this country. Many will argue that the current political stakeholders cannot or will not advance a meaningful anti-corruption program. Some of these stakeholders, after all, are direct beneficiaries of the practices that have to be stopped. But we're confident that change can and must happen. Some in the BiH judiciary have resisted change, for example, by standing in the way of an effective asset declaration and verification system. But some have also shown that they are willing and able to act. This country has agencies such as APIC, the Agency for Prevention of Corruption and Coordination in the Fight Against Corruption, and the anti-corruption bodies at other levels of government that are in a position to sustain a comprehensive effort to hold officials to account and influence them positively on reforms. The Sarajevo Canton, to just give you a few examples, the Sarajevo Canton anti-corruption body stands out as an example of professionalism, proactiveness, and courage to be replicated throughout the country. Likewise, the Joint Coordination Council of Judicial Office Holders. I'm very happy that this initiative came about in the last month. They were recently established by professional associations, is a crucial initiative to foster change within the judiciary. Moreover, we take great interest in the developments around the BiH Parliamentary Assembly's oversight activities in relation to the judiciary. While the independence of prosecutorial and judicial decision-making in individual cases must be fully respected, and I underlined it, must be fully respected and protected, the judiciary must be accountable for its overall functioning. This is a key point I would like you to take away. There must be accountability. All these examples reflect the public mood and can set proper examples of dialogue and engagement with citizens, civil society organizations, and other rule of law practitioners to strengthen the rule of law. Their work is crucial, but cannot replace authorities and leadership of judicial institutions being relentless in delivering positive change and justice for every citizen. And this is my final message. It's high time for the authorities to show the courage and real change. Why? Because your citizens want it. I've quoted the opinion polls. It's very clear what your citizens want. But secondly, also, as we have heard before, lack of progress on this stands in the way of your aspirations when it comes to the European Union agenda. Let me thank all of you for being here with us here in Sarajevo, but so many more people, hundreds of them following us online. I think it's really encouraging, inspiring. Last year we had 400. This year, I understand we have even more who are following us on this debate. Please use it and speak up. This is your forum. As I said last year, we are not giving up on this one. There will not be discount on the rule of law. And I'm also very happy, last point, to be joined after I've finished here by my colleague, German EU Presidency Ambassador Uber, who is with us here today. And I'm especially happy that somebody who I've met a month ago in Vienna found the time to be with us here today. She has become a role model for many young citizens of this country. She left Tuzla when she was 10. She did her studies. She worked hard. She is now today the Minister of Justice of the Republic of Austria. Very happy that Alma Sadic is with us today. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you all for being with us.
Hvala, ambasadore. Država predsjednica Vijeća Evropske.
Thank you, Ambassador. The country who is presiding over the Council of European Council is Germany, and their ambassador, Ambassador Huber, is here with us, and I will ask her to address us.
Ministers, Ambassador Sattler, High Judicial Office holders, dear participants. It is an honor for me to attend this public debate, Pravu na Pravdu, as a representative of the German EU Council presidency. This debate, in my view, is much needed and comes timely after 1 year after our last discussion in this framework and shortly after the publication of the EU Commission's country report on October 6. Having participated in the first of these debates a year ago, I realized that the lively discussion and the contributions by professional associations, legal experts, NGOs, and interested citizens broadly reflected people's wish and need for more integrity and transparency in the judicial system and its transformation into a system at the service of the citizen. I am often asked why Germany attaches so much value to the rule of law. The answer lies in the definition. The rule of law is the principle according to which no one, and I repeat, no one, is above the law, and according to which state organs are bound to carry out their responsibilities in line with the law. Not only is this principle deeply enshrined in our own constitution, the Grundgesetz, but strengthening the rule of law is an EU priority as the German Council presidency. We have therefore opened a comprehensive discussion in the Council on the basis of the first annual Commission report on the rule of law. We also consider that the rule of law is a core element of a modernized multi-annual financial framework. Therefore, from the start, we have supported the Commission's proposal to make EU spending conditional upon respect for the rule of law in member states. We deeply regret attempts of any member states to prevent the inclusion of the rule of law mechanism by linking it to the disbursement of urgently needed funds. And we hope that a solution can be found soon that helps to strengthen the rule of law while still allowing for an early disbursement of funds. Equally, the rule of law remains an essential precondition for countries that strive to become EU members or obtain candidate status. Looking at the Western Balkans, progress has already achieved, which is clearly demonstrated by the decision of the Zagreb summit to open accession negotiation with Northern Macedonia and Albania. Bosnia and Herzegovina should not and must not lag behind. When the High Representative Borrell visited Bosnia and Herzegovina only a few days ago, he once again reiterated the EU's full commitment to the EU's perspective for Bosnia and Herzegovina. The EU will continue to assist the country on the path of European integration. The 14 priorities defined by the Commission, and I can add the Priebe report for the area of the rule of law, remain the roadmap for this path. It is of utmost importance to start implementing these priorities now. When today we shall look in particular to two aspects relating to the rule of law, let us not forget that the rule of law is not only a European value, it is also a basic principle of the Bosnia and Herzegovina Constitution, which reads that Bosnia and Herzegovina shall be a democratic state under the rule of law. As for the priorities relating to the rule of law, they were complemented last year by the Priebe report. Yet the country report this year states that Bosnia and Herzegovina is still at an early stage of preparation in the area of judiciary, and that no appropriate action was taken to address the findings of the expert report. Integrity reforms have met resistance since from within the judiciary. Evident signs of deterioration require urgent measures to strengthen the integrity and regain citizens' trust in the judiciary, starting with a credible and rigorous system of verification of financial statements of judicial office holders. The findings clearly point out to the problem of obstructions to judicial reforms from political actors and from within the judiciary, and the poor functioning of the judiciary, which undermines citizens' enjoyment of rights and the fight against corruption and organized crimes. It will therefore be of high relevance that all politicians and relevant actors of Bosnia and Herzegovina finally address the deficiency in the judiciary with determination and energy, and show together with the fight of make them together with the fight of corruption clear priorities, and finally show the political will to move ahead. In that vein, I hope that today's meeting, though virtual, will send a clear signal and provide valuable input for the way ahead and contribute to a more active approach towards reforms of the judiciary. Have fruitful discussion and interesting debate.
Zahvaljujem se ambasadorici Uber. Kratka poruka, za sada već preko 200.
Thank you, Ambassador Eber. Just a brief message. If you have problems with translation, then you need to download the update version of Zoom. Now, we have been discussing judiciary, strong institutions based on the rule of law, and Minister of Justice of the Republic of Austria, Ms. Alma Zadic, will talk today about the situation in judiciary. Good morning, Ms. Zadic. Can you hear us well? Yes, I can hear you well. Ambassador Sattler, in his introduction, mentioned you as a role model for young women primarily, and of course young men in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You are a young person originally from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and you are now a Minister of Justice in one EU country. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends.
Ambassador Sattler, also because we had this opportunity to meet last month in Vienna, in Austria, shortly before everything locked down again because of Corona. And I'm really happy that we had the opportunity to exchange our views. And I'm also very glad to see that we share the same goals to help and encourage this wonderful country that is dear to both of us, and to strengthen its institutions, to help strengthen the rule of law, and to help the country also move towards the European Union. And that's why also I gladly took this opportunity and took gladly also the invitation to address the public debate on right to justice, because I think that's one of the key issues that Bosnia and Herzegovina is facing today. And if there's anything how I can help to contribute, we move towards this motto, right to justice, pravo na pravdu, I will do my best to support the country in their efforts. If we follow this right to justice motto, then we also need to face some realities. The reported opinion of the European Commission on recent developments in Bosnia and Herzegovina was, to say the least, not very It clearly urged for professional and depoliticized reform of public administration. It urged for integrity reforms within the judiciary and sincere progress in the fight against corruption, but also in the fight against organized crime. The report is not asking this for bureaucratic reason, but it addresses these issues for the sake of the future of this wonderful country and its wonderful people. Engaging in anti-corruption policy is one of the most important tasks of public administration in general. And to tell you the truth, it is something we all should be fighting for, no matter where we are. I mean, even in Austria, we deal with anti-corruption laws, we deal with preventing corruption and organized crimes constantly. And for Bosnia and Herzegovina, this is a very important task, in particular, if they want to move forward towards the European Union. And to tell you the truth, corruption is not only just another breach of law, nor is it an extra fee that someone has to pay to skip a ticket or a line. It is a lot of missing opportunities. It is the missing hospital. It is the missing business opportunity that is probably realized in another location. But it's also for the youth that are looking for their future elsewhere, because they cannot stand the corruption. The European Commission and the United Nations define corruption as a misuse of power to obtain private benefits. And to put it more bluntly, it is the cancer of economy and the social development. It might be invisible, but it has long-lasting effects. In addition to material change, which can only be estimated, corruption entails immense social destruction potential. Public confidence in the objectivity of the state provision or public confidence in the functioning of the legal systems are undermined because of the corruption. And in the worst case, they are sometimes also completely waned. And therefore, the most important aim that we have as a state, that every state has, is preserving the public trust in the functioning of the legal system. And effective corruption prevention systems do not only focus on the preventive effects of sanctionable regulations or prohibition, or the laws, but they have a much broader focus. It is about the creation of value-based organizational culture. It is about open communication channels. It's about clear responsibility. And ultimately, it's about confidence building and confidence preserving. Measures that are just as important as clear rules of conduct or sanctioning mechanism. In Austria, neither the legal system contains the legal definition of the term corruption, nor does the law have a perfect setup because, as you all know from observing the political scene in Austria a year ago, the Ibiza video and the Ibiza disaster, as we call it, clearly showed that there are also some loopholes in the law in Austria, and that we constantly need to work to preserve public attitude of everyone, to preserve the public confidence, and to constantly change and work on preventing corruption. Corruption-free institutions based on a culture of ethics, based on the rule of law, responsibility, and integrity are the backbone of any national development. But not only the institutions are responsible for this. Every single citizen has the power to lead the change. Every single citizen can contribute to fight against corruption. And be assured, this exercise never ends. In Austria, we also recently published new guidelines on ethical conduct, and I am currently working on closing certain loopholes in our criminal law concerning corruption. But it is of utmost importance to never give up, to strengthen integrity and regain citizens' trust. And citizens' trust not only in the institutions, but in particular the judiciary. It must be clearly stated that any obstruction of judicial reforms by political actors and within the judiciary undermines citizens' perception of justice and their fight against corruption and organized crimes. In this context, we should all be reminded that the fundamental basis for the rule of law, it's not always the law itself, but it's the confidence of the citizens in its effective application. And therefore the judicial is of utmost importance. Citizens' trust in the institutions and the judiciary means also trust in the future of this country. And trust, respect, and the dialogue is what Bosnia and Herzegovina needs to encourage the young generations to stay in the country and develop a perspective. Dear Bosnian colleagues, dear friends, achieving all this will not be done by the international community. The international community can only help and support the development, but it will be done by every one of you. It will be done by the Bosnian people, it will be done by Bosnia and Herzegovina, for the society and for a better future. I encourage you all to take an active part in this reform process and shape the country for a better change. And be assured, your neighbors, in particular Austria, that has a long tradition of working with Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the international community will be supportive and will be helpful friends on the way towards European Union, on the way to a better future. Thank you so much.
Hvala ministrice Zadić. Vjerujem da
Thank you, Minister Zadić. I believe that several hundreds of our audience are happy to hear that they have a partner in you and your country. Minister Zadić focused a lot in her presentation on the importance of development and preservation, or building and preservation of confidence of citizens in the judiciary. And we asked citizens across the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina what is their opinion. The situation in BiH judiciary is very bad. There is a lot of corruption, nepotism, and people in high position do whatever they please. We had an opportunity to see various reports of the international organization which said that the situation is not splendid. A case which should be resolved in 2 months has been addressed for many months. they have high salaries for the purpose of preventing corruption. But then when internationals write reports, they said they are under political influence. The decisions they take in judiciary are politically based. In our society, corruption is enshrined in every segment of the society. Mostly corruption is in the judiciary, police, and pharmacy.
Hvala lijepo. Evo sada počinjemo sa našim prvim panelom.
Thank you very much. Now we'll start with our first panel called Integrity First. We heard the keynote speakers, we heard some citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and now we'll make a very short break just to give time to the panelists who are here with us to come out at the podium. So the first panel is about the value of integrity in judiciary and public offices. The main question that we will try to answer, or at least to offer some guidelines how to proceed. Why is it so important that members of judiciary and holders of public offices to become positive examples of integrity in the whole society? Before the discussion, we will hear the abstract from the public survey that was done in October and November this year on the integrity and corruption. It was done by the delegation of EU for the purposes of this event today. So please let's see this short video. The results of the public opinion survey. So, dear audience members, you had the opportunity to see some of the results of this survey. We will talk more about this. I hear from our technicians that many participants are giving their comments, proving that this is a very interesting topic. We will talk to the judge, Jose Matos, who is the chair of the European Association of Judges and the Vice President of the International Association of Judges. And we have Mr. Wojtek Zielinski, who is Senior Advisor and Coordinator for Sigma Initiative under the Organization for Economic Cooperation. And I have Ms. Ivana Petkovic here, prosecutor in the prosecution of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Mr. Denis Džindić, who is the editor of the BiRN news agency. Mr. Matos, can you hear us? Mr. Matos should join us via video. Good day, Mr. Matos. Can you hear us?
Good morning. Good morning. Very honored to be here.
Hvala. Dakle, gospodine Matos, vladavina zakona nije samo
The rule of law is not just a condition for getting the candidacy status in the EU. It is the obligation that will remain valid even after joining the EU. We heard from the previous speaker that Austria is continually working to improve this segment of their society, although they've been a member of the EU for many years now. And the same applies to the integrity of the judicial system and its members. We know that the issue of integrity is not a matter of choice. It has to be integrated in the judicial system, and all the members of the system have to be a model, an example for everybody, all the members of society. How does this term integrity fit in the response of the BiH system, response of the BiH judicial system to the Priebe report and corruption in justice?
Well, I prepare a brief statement around 10 minutes that we'll try to tackle with your question. And I hope at the end we can have some answers for these important issues. In fact, having worked in Bosnia and Herzegovina to provide expertise on the topic of appraisal of judges, traveling around the country, talking with multiple stakeholders, in particular my fellow judges that I salute, it is then a great honor and a pleasure to participate in this project that has been so well conducted by the EU team in the region. And I would like to strongly emphasize the crucial importance of the topic addressed in the beginning of this event. Metaphorically speaking, integrity is like the air we breathe, emulating an expression used by Amartya Sen. To add to this image, I would comment that when enough, we neglect its presence, almost ignore it, but starting to fail, one becomes weak, hazy, starting to see everything dark, and finally losing understanding of oneself. But integrity is also the most decisive factor to build confidence in a judicial system. Make no mistake, without confidence, courts cannot meet the recognition of the citizens, the ones each of us vowed to serve as public officers. No democracy can survive if trust does not exist. This is an essential requisite for the legitimacy of democratic institutions. Integrity aims exactly to generate trustworthiness, covering both the internal aspect of professional ethics and the external aspect of public accountability. Adela Cortina, a well-known philosopher, emphasizes that corruption, meaning destruction in Latin, is encouraged by the weakening of the so-called internal good, described as the reason that justifies the existence of any given profession in a society. Being the internal good for the judiciary, the never-ending purpose of delivering justice to our fellow citizens, the genetical code, I would say, that defines our profession is precisely a personal and absolute commitment to judicial ethics. In order to perform as a judge, serving our internal good, we must concretely connect with those fundamental values. As Lynn McFall pointed out, in order to sell one's soul, one must have something to sell. Integrity endorses democracy, since it implies an open debate about professional conducts, besides inspiring judges to go far beyond the mere obedience to their functional duties prescribed by law. Integrity strengthens and reinforces judicial independence by promoting the implementation of a culture of excellence, the ultimate ambition of any judiciary. But allow me to briefly share my personal experience. As a member of the advisory board of the United Nations Judicial Integrity Network, I work in different judiciaries on this topic. My work as an expert for the Council of Europe, European Union, or OSCE addressed several European countries of different juridical cultures and traditions. The knowledge that I obtained in all those regions of the world determined that within the International Association of Judges, the biggest organization of judges composed by 92 countries from the 5 continents, along with other colleagues, we propose for EAJ's strategic plan a very fundamental pillar devoted to integrity, named Judges Against Corruption. Under this project that I have the pleasure to coordinate, we conducted multiple initiatives explaining time and again our main findings. Within judges, we must be absolutely determined. Zero tolerance against corruption. Judicial independence is just one face of the coin, being the other equally crucial, accountability. One cannot exist without the other. In modern societies, transparency emerges as the new objectivity. There is solid evidence that the judicial system with a high degree of transparency is the best safeguard against corruption. To ensure accountability on public institutions, the best way to proceed must concentrate on leading by example, knowing well that governance by judges does not imply for itself the absence of undue influences or unethical behavior. The problem of lack of trust by citizens on their national judiciaries, when existent, should make us emphasize in solving the problem of judicial accountability. In this context, when analyzing the recent opinion poll for Bosnia and Herzegovina prepared for the European Union Special Representative Office in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the key findings must light us all the red alerts. They are very disturbing. For one side, more than 2/3 of respondents do not trust Bosnia and Herzegovina judiciary at any level, while 7 out of 10 do not trust that the system will protect them if necessary. But to really worsen the situation, 8 out of 10 respondents, 80%, believe that the justice system in Bosnia and Herzegovina has not improved over the last 5 years. The Bangalore Principles of Judicial Conduct determines that a judge must accept personal restrictions that might be viewed as burdensome by the ordinary citizen and should do so freely and willingly. As a member of the advisory board for the ongoing review of Kiev recommendations on judicial independence of OSCE, and a very important standard for judiciaries in the region, it became clear for all of us the absolute need to improve the standards and practices of accountability, especially on top bodies of judiciary, judicial councils, court presidents, and superior courts. Thus, guidelines on accountability procedures within the governing bodies of the judiciary must be encouraged. Measures like requiring judges to declare assets and incomes as extensively as possible and to have professional external integrity bodies that can guarantee a system of control that effectively works are essential. Judges must be protagonists in this purpose of fostering accountability, not opponents. Otherwise, endangering the confidence of our communities, we will be exposed sooner than later to external controls and the weakening of our independence and impartiality. Decades ago, Eisenhower stated in a phrase now more actual than ever, the world no longer has a choice between force and law. If civilization is to survive, it must choose the rule of law. The world is facing again the problem of oligarchies. Etymologically, the word means rightly the rule of a few. That is why there are limits, I would say moral boundaries, imposed by democratic rules that cannot be surpassed, especially by judges. A good friend of mine, a prestigious law professor in Spain, often says that when invited to a conference although the organizers provide him with a title for his speech, he normally speaks of whatever he feels like at the moment. That subversive spirit enables me to renegade the title of my speech, Integrity First. As I try to explain, it is not the case of integrity coming first. It goes far beyond. The rule of law presupposes the norms of integrity, imposing transparency and accountability. Integrity exists long before we even start to draft a list of essentials. It constitutes our environment, our judicial ecosystem. It is like the air we breathe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matas. This was an inspiring and interesting presentation. I think we all understood your need to take a distance from the topic of your address. And you spoke about broad topics, the transparency and judiciary. Certainly, I hope you will stay with us. We will have questions for you. I heard that Mr. Priba is also following the discussion. We welcome him. Mr. Insko too. Let us follow up on the issue of integrity. We should have on the video link Mr. Wojtek Zielinski. Mr. Zielinski, can you hear us? Very well, you're there.
Good morning.
Good.
Dakle, gospodine Zielinski, je li važnije?
Mr. Zielinski, is it more important to display integrity at a higher level or lower level, higher level of politics or judiciary or low level? And what do you have an idea about solutions that could be useful for Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Many thanks, first of all, for the invitation, for this opportunity to speak. Good morning, everyone. In fact, I wanted also to look at integrity and anti-corruption measures from a different perspective. So many speakers were already mentioning very important, of course, a crucial role of judiciary, of police. And I also wanted to focus on other aspects, which are also very important, and they relate to different elements of functioning of public administration. So not only judiciary, not only police, not only specialized anti-corruption bodies. This is because I work for the Sigma program, which is a part of the OECD, principally financed by the European Union. And we work on general improvement of public administration in our countries, while not working on specific anti-corruption measures. We just believe that improving different areas of functioning of public administration, like civil service, like public management, like public procurement, and many other areas, it all contributes to improving the level of integrity and also to prevent corruption. Let me also make reference to the OECD definition of integrity. The OECD defines public integrity as the consistent alignment of and adherence to the shared ethical values, principles, and norms for upholding and prioritizing the public interest over private interests in the public sector. What is important in this definition is that there is this shared ethical values, principles, and norms. So they have to be shared by everyone. And of course, answering to your question and also referring to what Mr. Matos said, this leadership is a very important feature. So you were asking, is it top? Is it lower levels? The leadership of the top managers, of the politicians, is crucial for the success of any anti-corruption reforms. And also, the OECD issued in 2017 recommendation on public integrity. And our organization draws attention to the need to work in 3 areas. So one is system, another is accountability. And I can clearly see that in many discussions on integrity or on anti-corruption, we tend to focus a lot on the system. So on the institutional setup, on the legislation, and sometimes we neglect a little bit this dimension of culture and accountability. That's why I would like to refer also to some of the work Sigma is doing now in Bosnia, which contribute to these areas of culture and accountability. One project we are engaged in is the work on reforming the laws on access to public information. And this is exactly a crucial piece of legislation because I strongly believe that increased transparency, if linked to accountability, is really crucial for fighting corruption in the country. It is quite obvious that the more citizens are able to scrutinize the work of public administration, the less unpunished would civil servants feel, and they will also comply better with all the regulations. And what we see in Bosnia, what we see as a problems or as a main shortcomings, they are linked to transparency. For example, a very low level of proactive provision of public information through websites. So basically, citizens have to just formulate individual requests very frequently to get the information. They cannot find it on the websites. And second is linked to accountability, which is lack of efficient and effective monitoring, supervision, and appeal mechanism. Currently, the appeal mechanism in Bosnia is there is internal appeal to the head of the body and then to the court. And of course, the court procedures can be very long. And if I place myself as a journalist or a member of civil society organization, I can clearly imagine that I may need public information very fast, not wait for 1 or 2 years until I get the court judgment on this. So these are very important issues, the transparency, the general legislation on access to public information. I also wanted to mention another area which is also very important and on which also Sigma works with Bosnia, which is civil service reform. And here, of course, there are many aspects, there are many improvements possible, there are many challenges, of course, but I would like to mention 2 issues. First is exactly what already Mr. Matos mentioned, the leadership. I believe that first of all, example and commitment by senior civil servants is essential for the success of reform. Secondly, it should be a commitment by the politicians. Without this, even there is a lot of pressure for national organizations and good legislation adopted, it will not be success. The commitment and the leadership on both political and civil service level is so important. Apart from this, of course, the legislation is not ideal. I could list a long list of possible improvements, but what is important is also the implementation. So some provisions are there, they are not bad, but they are just abused in the implementation. Other provisions are in the legislation, but they are rarely used. Let me give an example of disciplinary procedures, which are pretty well regulated in the civil service legislation, but there are not many such procedures taking place. So maybe not to make it longer, to give you some time for discussion, just to conclude, I wanted to emphasize 3 issues. So first of all, apart from crucial role played by judiciary, police, specialized anti-corruption offices, I wanted to emphasize the importance of well-functioning public administration in many other areas, including external, internal control, public procurement, civil service, and so on. Secondly, I wanted to emphasize the role of transparency, but it should be always coupled with accountability. Transparency alone will not improve the situation. Transparency with good accountability mechanisms, this is a way to go. And the third conclusion is that while legal provisions are extremely important, their implementation is equally important to the existence of legal provisions. So maybe I'm not sure if I answered your question exactly, because your question was about judiciary, but I also wanted to raise, to also draw your attention to the fact that to other elements of the system that also have to work well to have a good integrity system in place. Thank you.
Hvala, gospodine Jelinski. Da, svakako u pravu ste, integritet je bitan za sve nositelje javnih funkcija, bitan je za sve građane, naravno. I vrlo interesantna poenta o Zospiju, sigurna sam da gospodin Đidić ima tu more svojih nekih komentara i zamjerki, možda na sam zakon i na njegovu provedbu, ali evo, novinari su često savjest društva. Imate uvid u mnoga zbivanja o kojima mi možda ne možemo ni da sanjamo. Već odavno se u pojedinim medijima kroz istraživački rad ukazuje na nedostatak transparentnosti kada je u pitanju bosansko-hercegovačko pravosuđe, njihova izoliranost, tako da kažemo, nedostatka društva koja se ogleda u odbijanju kritika na račun pravosuđa do potpune netransparentnosti kada je u pitanju imovina sudija i tužilaca ili neočitovanja o takozvanim visoko profilnim slučajevima. Gospodine Đidiću, kao novinar, evo izvršni direktor BiRN-a koji je dobijao nagrade za izvještavanje o ovoj temi, koja su vaše iskustva u vezi transparentnosti rada pravosuđa u BiH, naročito kada se radi o ovim, tako da ih nazovemo, visoko profiliranim predmetima?
Hvala lijepa. Dakle, mi smo ovdje godinu dana od objave ekspertskog izvještaja.
Publication of the expert report on the rule of law, which included a sentence that is the most horrifying sentence ever said about judiciary in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I would like to quote it for the start, and then we will continue discussing about any possible changes. The sentence says, in the past several years, the HJPC has become part of the problem. Some omissions have become obvious due to the lack of leadership position, conflict of interest, ineffective organization, lack of transparency in public relations, and ultimately its failure in implementation of reforms. This sentence tells you that not only the judiciary as a whole is a problem, but the leaders have become part of the problems, and it lists all these shortcomings that the citizens face when they want to exercise their rights and the journalists exercise when they want to have access to these cases. In the past 12 months, when we are talking about what has changed, well, very little or nothing. I know that many members of judiciary will say it's not fair, we have this pandemic in 10 months and we cannot expect to improve the processes at the speed that it was expected. But because of the pandemic and because of the cases that were up to the judiciary and the courts to resolve, made it painfully clear the lack of transparency and lack of strategic plans that have put some issues in perspective. And I will share with you some examples of the investigative journalism, not only BiRN, that show and demonstrate the main problems that citizens face, as well as the citizens when researching these topics. The first point, a lack of transparency as a crucial issue in the report, is something that the EU has been insisting on continuous basis, that appointing the especially leaders of judicial institutions, the managerial managerial positions, chief prosecutors, presidents of the courts, should be appointed on basis of merits exclusively, that all other parameters are secondary and of lesser importance, and can only come into play when we have equally meritorious candidates. But that is being neglected. We are faced with refusals to improve this process. 10 months after the publication of the expert report, only 2 months ago, we had a new appointment for the Supreme Court of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And this process was problematic for several things. After the first ranking list, the first person on the ranking list who has never been invited to the second round. And after the appointment, that person complained, and the whole process has been returned to decision making. And again, on the ranking list, this person was again the first, and the appointed person was the fifth. And again, the decision was made repeatedly made to appoint the fifth ranking person. And when we asked why is that so, why do you ignore the ranking list, they refer to the ethnic background. So the failure to appoint a judge based on merits and their professionalism is not being seen. If we talk about the transparency of the HJPC, we must say that, again, 10 months into pandemic, the last session of the HJPC was online without access of journalists. That shows that instead of moving towards getting used to the corona pandemic and allowing access to journalists and general population, especially on the session that was to consider the law on HJPC as one of the crucial reform steps in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the journalists were denied access, and they were not allowed to follow the discussion on what would be the priorities and what were the positions of the leaders of judicial institutions. The issue of transparency, well, the previous speakers talked about declaring assets as one of the key crucial issues of integrity. What we've seen in the past 12 months was the systemic refusal to resolve this issue, not only by the HJPC, but also by the courts, judges, prosecutors in Bosnia and Herzegovina, who show active refusal to make their list of assets generally accessible, so that the general public has full information on what they have on their assets. We often see that they invoke the violation of rights to privacy, that the judges should be perceived in a different way than the politicians for whom we insist that their assets are made public. But essentially that is not violation of the right to privacy, because every person has the right and they are free to decide whether they want to be a judge and be paid from the budget. And if they decide to do so, they are accountable to the public, and they must be transparent and make all this information available. And there is a whole set of some smaller problems that the media got used to when they're working and trying to get some answers. And they were not so much in the focus, but still create problems. Disciplinary decisions against the judges and prosecutors are still anonymized, which defeats the purpose of the punishment that they are given, like a public reprimand, which is not public. Indictments for corruption are not public, and those journalists who are allowed to follow these cases have many problems to get the information in order to be able to properly report to the general public on what is in the indictment and what are they talking about in these courtrooms. In the past year, we also noticed a systemic refusal to engage in a transparent dialogue on the situation in judiciary. We saw that the Parliament of Bosnia and Herzegovina started an investigating committee on the situation in judiciary, and HJPC recommended to judges and prosecutors not to communicate with this parliamentary committee, which departed from the earlier example of past years when a politician from Republika Srpska organized a meeting where certain members of AJPC participated. So we see this a clear refusal to transparently communicate with the representatives of authorities on situations in judiciary. So this is the problem when we talk about transparency. I could talk a lot longer about this, but I would like to leave you some time for asking questions. Speaking about the lack of strategic response, we are now some 10 months into the pandemic of the coronavirus. Unfortunately, many courts, or at least some number of courts in Bosnia and Herzegovina, are still lacking appropriate crisis plans. Some of them have one page of something. In addition, we had an attempt of the AJPC to start the online procedures for some processes to be allowed. As a result and as a response to that, you got some completely opposite opinions of the Ministry of Justice of Bosnia and Herzegovina from one hand, AJPC on the second side, and the Supreme Court from the third side, and we saw an end of all these talks in the public arena. We were informing the general public about this during the first 2 or 3 months, but after that we never received any feedback or follow-up or information on whether these discussions are continuing, have any moves been made. And as a result, the Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina, as the highest court with the strongest capacities, are not doing the trials. So you have very high-profile cases there, and the court is decided not to proceed because of the inability to provide social distancing. And the lower courts have it even worse. So this suggests that there is an essential problem there. And speaking of the priorities in the work in the past 10 months, the AJPC communicated 3 different focuses for the prosecution of Bosnia and Herzegovina. They were publicly communicated to the media. At the very beginning of the pandemic, 10 months ago, you had an announcement that they would focus on the cases that are aimed at protection of health of the general public. Several months later, when the media reporting started about how the public procurements are being conducted in a way that is not in accordance with the law on public procurement, that there is corruption, alleged corruption there, then they sent out a message that those should be in the focus. And a few months ago, they issued another recommendation that prosecutors should put in their focus the election theft, because we had the elections and there was a lot of allegations of election irregularities. If you take these 10 months and try to find results on the 3 different focuses that were placed before the prosecutions, you are very disappointed. When it comes to the cases about health, you have next to none indictments, and these reports that were submitted, courts are refused. For example, you have that situation in Banja Luka for many cases. In public procurement cases, there is only one serious investigation started after an enormous pressure from the general public. That's the so-called ventilator affair. That was opened by the portal focus.BiH. And we saw some clear irregularities, lack of transparency, inappropriate response, and we saw no reaction of the prosecutors. There was no transparent communication of any of the results. And the same goes for the election theft. But there's been a very limited time since this most recent recommendation, so maybe it's too early to expect anything there. Generally speaking, I would like to conclude with the issue of accountability of the holders of judicial offices. In the report of the expert report of the EU, they focused specifically on disciplinary responsibility of the members of AJPC. That question has never been addressed in recent months. The BiH reported that guidelines regarding prevention of conflict of interest has been changed after the president of AJPC, in the case of the compensations for arbitration that he had done, earned an amount that would violate the original guidelines, so the guidelines have changed to prevent that. And there were other allegations that suggest inappropriate communication with the general public by a member of AJPC who is not a member anymore. So the issue of accountability has not been addressed at all. And even those decisions that have been made, their transparency is very lacking. And I will conclude with a sentence about the social cost of all of it, what all these affairs mean for people whom we saw just recently, people who are saying that they have no confidence in the judiciary and the system of justice. That cost is the most obvious in the case of Emir Mehic. Emir Mehic is a whistleblower who pointed at some irregularities in the indirect taxation authority, and he reported it. And he was assigned the status of a whistleblower that should protect him. After a year after the report, and no prosecutor even heard him. He, out of frustration, he came to us, and we published a text on these irregularities, and as a result, he was disciplinary prosecuted at his work because he publicly spoke about certain things. And that is the role of the whistleblower. But the reaction of judiciary was not there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jedic. We will discuss the whistleblowers during our second panel. Ms. Petkovic, you've heard many long discussion so far. Mr. Jedic spoke about shortcomings and problems that he wanted to present from the perspective of professional journalists. And now you are in a position to provide an inside information. You are working in this system, and we heard Ambassador speaking about some bright examples of your colleagues who have been diligently and professionally working in this profession, and how important it is for the judicial officials to engage in these processes, and how can we regain the trust of citizens while we are talking, we receive hundreds of comments of citizens, but they are all negative. I'm still looking for a nice and positive comment to read it, but unfortunately I cannot find any. As you said, I was invited to provide an insight in the current situation of the judiciary and the fight against corruption and integrity of judiciary. It is absolutely clear, and we have been repeatedly stressed integrity before first. That there are without integrity, there can be no fight against corruption. The judicial officials are required to promote integrity. Integrity is key and essential for democratic society at large. In the judiciary, we have discussed this issue of integrity, its contents, the phenomena, and we were not loud enough when we had to respond to certain situations that involved the integrity of judicial officials. It is not a secret that the perception of citizens is very poor when it comes to the judicial integrity. There were numerous surveys, and every time the result was the same or similar, that the citizens have doubts and uncertainty regarding the functioning of judiciary. I have been prosecutor for slightly over 8 years, and my perception of my environment is that the perception of the public to a great extent is based on media presentation of certain cases and certain individuals from judiciary, and some information that that interfere in investigative actions. I should also note that after such articles are publicized about scandals, they are perceived mostly as scandals in the media. The public identifies these scandals with the institutions from which the individual comes, and therefore they have a very bad perception of the judiciary. When I was preparing for certain issues that we could be discussed at today's debate, I thought there would be two thesis. First of all, the role of judiciary and its importance, and what the judiciary can do to improve the current perception on the judiciary. And the second is what are positive and negative impacts on this perception. To start, in a number of media titles, I am insulted as an individual and as a professional that all the media coverage ignore the progress and good developments and achievements of judicial officials. I refer to some judicial officials who take their job seriously, work and they are committed and they work on a daily basis to enhance the integrity. But among numerous media coverage and articles, this has been neglected. I suppose you will all agree that every individual is creator of both personal and professional integrity, but this personal integrity remains within the scope of the private sphere unless it is promoted and encouraged by the public. And the institutions from which individual comes, such as the AJPC, judiciary, academia, also play a role to this end. To this end, I believe that we as individuals, as judicial officials, as professionals, must not remain silent. We must publicly share our arguments aiming at identification of both positive and negative developments in the judiciary. As professionals, we must be in a position to provide argumented criticism. I always stress that we need arguments for whatever we want to promote and stress. But my perception is that the individuals in the judiciary don't speak sufficiently about the current developments in the country, which reflect on the development in the judiciary. I should note that we always seek not to insult others, not to be taking. We all have, if we have a strong personal position, and we should be able to cut these practices which tell us that we have been doing this always in this way or in another way. And when we are in a position to discuss all the challenges and find the solutions in meaningful discussions, we can accept the change of perception among the citizens. We should be aware that there is a huge number of judicial officials who are well able to address the major challenges we face. We mentioned the survey today, and I read at one point that 97% of the respondents said that they never reported corruption. But it is appalling because we all know that we face corruption on a daily basis, and if individuals don't find it necessary to report this to the authorities, we should ask ourselves what this is. The reasons are not relevant. This is just an indicator that we have a communication problem with citizens. And I should also mention a survey which pertained to the judicial officials, and it focused on certain ethical norms in the judiciary, and I read information that surprised me. 20% of respondents said that they don't find their ethical obligation to report unethical conduct of their colleagues. This is indeed an indicator which demonstrates where we need to start working and what problems we need to address. I am fully aware that as judicial official or public official, we are here to protect the rights of citizens and the rights of the society at large. But what I have noticed is that we have insufficient support from the media. Some will say that this is not the task of the media, that they are not required to provide this support. But what I mentioned a while ago, they sometimes publish unverified information, and they do so repeatedly, and this results in a degrading perception among the citizens. I will not criticize directly the media. Of course, they have their own arguments. We heard a while ago about the conduct of certain institutions, their disregard for the applications of journalists, and they're not being open to the public. But we should not forget, and this is insulting for us as professionals, there is a huge number of incorrect, unverified information that have been published and that pertain to some individuals from the judiciary. I was in a position to read extensive media coverage on judges and prosecutors, and they label judges and prosecutors with offensive names, and this cannot be in compliance with the journalist ethic, or sometimes they misinterpret intentionally some information they receive. The judiciary has asked our colleagues from the media to resist to such practices and misplacement of information. I don't know if I stress sufficiently that we are a public service, that we are exposed to criticism. Of course, criticism is welcome if argumented and supported by evidence, and when we have supporting facts and arguments, the judiciary will address their criticism. And I use this opportunity to invite the judicial officials to respond to any argumented and supported criticism that will improve our cooperation. Let me mention one positive example, which involves citizens, journalists, and judiciary. It is a media coverage about a person just before the election, a person who was offered to participate in organized election fraud. This person, although he could have benefited from his engagement or her engagement, decided to approach the judiciary. After the judiciary, in a rapid response, successfully collected sufficient evidence and have the person arrested. The journalists had an opportunity to obtain documents and the supporting evidence they needed to report to the public. So we were all in a position to read this research journalist coverage, and that was a very nice example, and I thought it would be nice to mention it. I would also like to read a sentence with which this person explained the decision. I found myself in the situation where I could choose to remain silent, but I didn't want to do this because everyone remained silent, and this is why we are in a situation we are. And I deeply believe that the judiciary has capacities to respond to all the challenges, current challenges, and I am confident that every individual must be heard, must be from the judiciary, and to this end they need support of the society at large. And I believe that this debate should continue in a reconciling tone, so as to discuss and to see what every individual, every member of the judiciary, the journalism, what we need to do in order to change the situation.
Thank you, Ms. Petkovic. I was following some comments during your presentation. I'm sure you will find it interesting, but it's obvious that the citizens are not responding very well. They interpret what you said as an attempt to put the media into the role of the one who is responsible. But now, since we finished with this introduction, we open the floor to the questions of both our online viewers and you here. Many people are following what's being said. They're talking about unresolved cases, the cases Memic, Dragicevic, Silver, Rosbury, Srebrna Malina, and others. They say that the justice is not made, lack of integrity contributes to that. So please, if you two of you could answer this question. How does the lack of integrity in system of justice in Bosnia and Herzegovina and pervasive corruption contribute to all these cases? Maybe, Denis, you could say something first. I would just very briefly go back to what Ivana said. I will start by saying, of course, that there are unprofessional media reporting. Yes, whoever said it wasn't the truth would be making the fundamental mistake. This is the reality as in any other field. I will also say that the investigating media have done a lot more work to disclose the true cases of corruption that are sufficiently proven to make them open to prosecution. But even if we take media out of this equation, we often see these attempts by some members of judiciary. I don't mean you, of course. What you said was very moderate, but they accept media as their enemy. But if we took out the media, if we only take the international reports, yesterday press conference of the Oecd, that has been no indictment for high-level corruption in the year. Ignore the media. Let's take that everything that they're saying is not true. But the Oecd said this. if we look at how this affects, well, I think it affects everything at the elementary level. The issue of integrity is something that citizens are very sensitive to. They feel what they feel, whether they're there to report certain things because of that perception. And I agree, sometimes this perception is magnified because of some of the writings in the press, but this is a minor percentage compared to the realities. If you leave out the media reports, if you only take the expert report of the EU, OSCE report, international lawyers, not journalists, you will see how the situation is in a judiciary. Amongst other things, in your presentation, you said how important it is to point at the unethical behavior of the colleagues. And in the context of this issue, to respond on that, and please keep in mind the time. You mentioned these comments at the chat. I'm sorry that all my presentation is brought down to my attack on the media. It was understood as my attack on the media. What I wanted to say was that I was talking about two important roles that could contribute to improved perception of the general public. The first was that the holders of judicial function, each and every one of them, has to give a contribution to stop these negative trends. That's what I wanted to say. And I also wanted to draw attention to the media approach. Absolutely, and I said this in the presentation, amongst the holders of the judicial functions, integrity is the most important thing, the image that we are building and the general public perceives when we are doing or working on different cases. We are trying to preserve that. I gave a proposal, I presented my proposal of the ways how we can improve the integrity of the judiciary as a whole. And that is by presenting individual positions and the discussions at the collegiates, sessions of the court, quorum, etc. And to be more open to the public, to be able to present to them the complexities of a judicial function. I think that basically your intention is clear. You try to say that, yes, there are individuals within the system who are doing their jobs honorably and professionally, but this is not communicated enough. Sometimes public relations are not working. Public is your partner, should be your partner, but there is still a lot of things that should be put in order, including public relations as a very important activity. I have very, very many questions from the audience. We will not have time to answer all of them. Ambassador Sattler, you and your team perhaps should organize another panel with representatives of the judicial institutions and maybe press. That may be interesting. If there is anybody here in the audience who would like to ask a question or give comments, you are more than welcome to. We have come to the end of our first panel. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you who were following us via the Zoom. Now we'll start the second panel, corruption, a shared concern. Fighting corruption is a common goal. We mentioned it quite a lot during the first part. I think we should not explain what the corruption is and how it affects all parts of the society. And I don't think we need to emphasize its pervasiveness in all parts of the BiH society and its effect on the lives of all of us. I will now show you a short video that concerns the second part of the public survey about the pervasiveness of corruption here. So we are back. I want to ask a question from the first panel because we keep receiving them. A question for Mr. Tegeltia, the chair of the High Judicial and Prosecutorial Council. Mr. Tegeltia, we've had cases for which there is a claim that are investigated in secret, but have not been started at all. Why don't you suspend the judges or prosecutors for whom you know that they are not doing their job in a conscientious way, properly? Interpreters cannot hear the response. I don't know what is the specific problem. The suspension or removal from duty comes when we receive such a proposal from the disciplinary department, and the proceeding judge is making this decision. It is not a decision to be made by the president of the council. Any suspension does not mean establishment of responsibility. It's just a measure to remove somebody until the final decision is made. Whether the investigations are conducted or not, it's hard to say. I don't even know that. If the investigations are being conducted, they are secret. And the prosecutor tells us that when they see that there is a reason to notify the public. So this is the question for the prosecutors, any in Bosnia and Herzegovina, including the chief prosecutor, not the chair of the AJPC. When we talk about disciplinary responsibility, we have procedures, and when we have sufficient evidence that somebody committed a disciplinary offense, and suspension is a measure that can be pronounced or not to the holder of judicial office against whom the procedure has been started, if their remaining in the function could disrupt the disciplinary proceedings. These things are not easy to understand to a layman. It's not somebody's decision. Like Milan Tegeltia, as the president of the council, can make that decision, or any other member of the council, or the council as a whole. This is done in the two-instance procedure. Yes, of course, but there are many citizens who are commenting cases that are well known in the public, cases of Dragicevic and Memic. Mr. Dragicevic and Mr. Memic seniors are together with us on the Zoom, and they are frustrated with the lack of progress in the processes involving their sons. And they are frustrated, and they want to ask questions to the main responsible people in our system. They want to ask what is going on, and if there is nothing going on, who is responsible? The answer is the following. I fully understand their frustration. Both these gentlemen that you mentioned who lost their sons without seeing the epilogue. They don't know what's happening. It is fully understandable, their frustration. But me, as the president of the AJPC, I'm not the one to offer any answer. We are not dealing with the individual cases. That's one thing. Second thing, unfortunately, investigations can take long time. It's a general thing. And it's not only the case in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Such situations exist in Europe, in the world in general. There are the dark numbers of crimes, cases that are never finished. I hope that will not be the case here. But we cannot start with the assumption that the prosecutors are hiding things, trying to conceal things. If there is any evidence that a prosecutor or judge or anybody is doing something illegal, that needs to be reported. And then there are mechanisms, procedures, and bodies whose job is to identify the facts and make decisions based on that. feel free to join us in the next panel. Ms. Gordana Tadic, the Chief Prosecutor of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Just please, very briefly, Ambassador Sattler after her, because we have people waiting for us. Good day. I want to thank you for organizing this meeting again under the name Pravo na Pravdu, Right to Justice. We've read all these national and international recommendations for the judiciary in Bosnia and Herzegovina. However, these recommendations do not relate only to the justice system, but other bodies who are responsible for fighting against corruption and for implementing the 14 recommendations of the EU. I would like to say here that we must accept the criticism that is justified, and we do that. But this year has shown that the results will be better no matter how much pressure we are exposed from every side. The pressures are not often talked about. All the holders of judicial functions who are working on any serious cases are exposed to pressures. And the pressures are not a problem per se, but they become a problem when we hear threats to lives of holders of these functions. Those of us who accept that have to be brave. And I was ready to accept that. And I hope that this year, in spite of the COVID pandemic, in the next meeting like this, Pravo na Pravdu will show some much better results. I will also use this opportunity to send a message to families Memic and Dragicevic, especially family Memic, since it is our case, as a case of organized crime, and that is our responsibility, that is in our competencies, that we will have some results soon. And to the family Dragicevic, they are being processed by the Republika Srpska prosecution office. Their case has not been sent to us. If it is sent at some point in future, we will start working on it. We must distinguish two things. In case of family Memic, we had an indictment, and we saw the result. The Supreme Court of the Federation is to make the second decision, and we could have get involved considering it is an organized crime cases. And I talked to the family Memic several times, and I think there will be some concrete results soon. As for the family Dragicevic, I feel for them, but this case is in a different stage. It's in the stage of investigation, and if it ever reaches the prosecution of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we will continue the work. These two cases have attracted a lot of attention in previous years, but this year we see more cases that attract even more attention. We saw, if you were following this very carefully, and the media, even when a case is reported as anonymously, if the case is reported by some who do not want to say how they got the information, and this influences the citizens not to report corruption. I call on the citizens not to be afraid. Corruption is mostly at the local level, while most of the attention is at the high-level corruption. But I want to invite the citizens to report corruption that's happening around them. What falls within our competency, report it to us, and everything that we receive, we will really take into consideration. And if we see it's not up to us, we will pass it on to other competent institutions. I also want to encourage media. Just one more sentence. I want to thank Ivana Petković, prosecutor, for such a good introduction, and I stand behind what she said. This is how we work in the prosecution, as she explained, and I invite the media to work with us so that we can provide legally obtained evidence, because otherwise you will see no results.
Thank you, Ms. Tadic. Ambassador Sattler, very briefly, please, because we are lagging behind.
And the panelists for their contributions. Minister Sadic speaking clearly about cancer, corruption as the cancer of any society, invisible but having long-lasting effects. Also, Prosecutor Petrovic, thank you very much for your pointing the finger also to the fact that yes, many people are afraid of speaking up. We have this problem, 97% in our poll of people who will not report about corruption cases. This is an issue. We have to address it. And this has to do, of course, also with the fear, with the lack of trust in institutions. This is a very important aspect you mentioned. And last point, what do citizens want in this country? Citizens want that nobody is above the law. A, and B, citizens want that their proceedings at court are finished within a reasonable time. Now, this brings me to the cases which are mentioned. When I last read about them, I think it's in the Memic case, it's 5 years. In the Dragicevic case, it's 3 years. Yes, there are procedures. Yes, it takes time also in other countries, but it's unacceptable that it takes so long. It's unacceptable that parts of witnessing material has disappeared. This is a real issue which needs to be addressed, because in the end, delayed justice is denied justice. If you delay the proceedings for a very long time, this is you deny people justice, and this is something very important which has to be addressed.
Hvala njegove ekscelenciji. Evo o temi korupcije u društvu.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now, today, we will speak about the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Together with us, Mr. Gianluca Esposito, the Executive Director of GRECO, Mr. Zoran Ivančić, Director of the Center for Representation of Citizens' Interest, Ms. Leila Bičakčić, Director of the Center for Research Journalists, and Faruk Hadžić, Economic Analyst. The GRECO, the organization to fight corruption at the level of Europe, you have been providing recommendations and guidance for many years now, and you have been warning about the issue of disclosure of financial disclosure has been met with resistance among our judges and prosecutors. Is it a violation of privacy, as we have heard judges and local judges and prosecutors saying, and how far is the recommendation issued by the Council of Europe implemented?
Right, I suppose you can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, that's good. All right, thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the floor. Before answering the question, let me perhaps just for a moment and try to address a little bit the overall set of recommendations that GRECO issued to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Before I do that, though, let me start by thanking very much the European Union and the organizers of this event for inviting me, the Council of Europe, GRECO, to be present at this event. GRECO is, as you said, the Council of Europe anti-corruption body. We comprise 50 member states. That is the whole of geographical Europe, plus the United States, Kazakhstan, and Belarus. Together with the OECD, the UN, and the Organization of American States in the US, we actually constitute one of the four global anti-corruption bodies. Bosnia has been a member of GRECO since the year 2000. And the GRECO has carried out 4 evaluation rounds in respect of Bosnia and Herzegovina. These evaluation rounds focused very much on public sector integrity. Questions like political financing and the transparency of no corruption of and members of parliament, And very soon we're going to look at the question of prevention of corruption. Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Čujemo vas. Kamera vam se ugasla, mislim da vam je internet.
We can hear you, but your camera is off. Never mind, you can continue speaking without video. It's important to hear you.
Okay, that's fine. So I was saying that we have covered really in our evaluation most of the public sector in Bosnia and Herzegovina, like we have covered in all other 49 members of GRECO. In total, we have issued 71 recommendations to Bosnia and Herzegovina in 20 years. As of today, only 27 of those 71 recommendations have been fully implemented. That is 37%. During the last evaluation round that started in 2015 and is still ongoing, and it focuses, as you said, on corruption prevention in the judiciary as well as in the parliament, none of the 15 recommendations that GRECO issued to Bosnia have been fully globally satisfactory. The last two reports are not public yet because we have not received the authorization to publish them from the authorities. So I will not be able to discuss them in detail. I'll try to highlight some of the issues that we have seen. First of all, when it comes to members of parliament, we are still looking for the introduction of some rules that relates to the interaction parliamentarian with third parties that are trying to influence the legislative process. Also, the much awaited legislation on conflict of interest has not yet been adopted. And we still don't have in place a credible and independent mechanism to prevent and resolve conflict of interest and ensure the checking of asset declarations by parliamentarians. Now, as regards the judiciary, the previous, and a lot of issues have been raised already. But from our perspective, we're still waiting for amendments to the legislation on the High Council of Justice and Prosecutors. That's not adopted yet. We haven't seen yet the guarantee in place for the non-interference of the executive and the legislative power during the performance of judges and prosecutors. And indeed, as you rightly pointed out, there is no system placed yet for the assessment of financial statements and the related sanctions for non-compliance for asset declarations by the judiciary. Clearly, the problem is not related to privacy. Let me be very clear about this. We in GRECO have recommended a very similar system to all our member states. And of course, it is very important to make sure that privacy is duly respected. But if the system is in place in such a way that privacy is respected, the system can work. And we have seen it work in a lot of our member states. And there is no reason why it shouldn't work in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I've touched briefly about political financing. We still don't have in place recommendations that we have issued in relation to the organization of the legal framework. There is no promotion yet of the banking system to make contributions to political parties and increase the financial and personal resources allocated to the Central Electoral Commission. Now, why are reforms important? This is not just about picking on a few details. This is about setting up a preventive mechanism that stops corruption before it actually arises. And that is key to the rule of law, democracy, to human rights, but also to economic development, to increase FDI, foreign direct investment, to increase the amount of taxes that are collected, to provide better public services, and to provide better infrastructure. So with a tool, with a system in place, a net around the public service that prevents corruption before arising, I think we are all better off. And I think what Greco is looking for is, and there is a paragraph, actually the first paragraph in our 2015 evaluation to Bosnia, and this is public and can be accessed by anyone. We said clearly that a firm political will to push forward a far-reaching reform agenda in the area of anti-corruption is still needed. And until we see that, we're not going to see these reforms actually materializing. I'll be happy to enter into the details during the discussions. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present Greg's report on Bosnia. Thank you.
Hvala vam, gospodine Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Esposito. We have with us Mr. Zoran Ivančić, also on Zoom. I also hope you can hear us. Yes, we can hear you well. We've heard about examples of corruption from top down, and we've seen results of the survey showing that 97% of respondents from Bosnia and Herzegovina never reported a case of corruption. How can we reconcile these two extremes, the loss of money and the non-reporting of corruption? And we wanted to hear from you something about the topic of whistleblowers. We cannot. I hope that I have sufficient time. Mr. Ivančić, we have some background noise and technical problems. Perhaps if you can check your device, I will ask our colleagues to deal with your equipment, but then we will, in the meantime, start discussing with Mr. Hadžić. The newest borrowing is 750 million that was voted on last year. You have, what is the longest term consequence of the corruption? Is it young people leaving Bosnia and Herzegovina or something else? And in which way does the corruption goes from top down, and how does it undermine the society? The influence of corruption on the economy is a direct consequence of captured state we live in today, and this will answer the question why we need such huge borrowings from the International Monetary Fund. You know that the blockage instruments, the parties that win the major number of votes are winners of the elections, and then they control all the appointments, supervisory boards, ministers. They win all. They have all in their hands, all the resources of the country. And this is the first level of corruption, where you can influence directors of public companies who are the greatest losers in the country. The last IMF report says that the public companies owe 4 billion euros, most of it for taxes, if we compare it with the GDP. Now, appointing such people on the basis of their membership in the party means that we don't have professionals in charge of management structures. It is nearly impossible that Mr. Zoran or Leila is a part of a governing board or steering board, because steering boards are appointed at the sessions of the government without any competition, without any. We all know in advance that only members of one party will be appointed to lead companies or institutions. This methodology has, if you look back at 2014, 2015, that dragged us back on our path to EU. We have $777 per capita, and in Croatia and Montenegro they have over 1,000. It's not that we did not make a progress, but we have a setback. We would need over 20 years to a growth of 4% to come where Croatia is today. This is the key reason why young people are leaving Bosnia and Herzegovina today. We have corruption, which is in all our systems. Bosnia and Herzegovina is lagging behind 100 years after the EU. It would take us 100 years to reach the standard of EU. And the consequence is the mass emigration, and several thousand citizens were issued permit to leave, but this is not the final number. People don't see perspective here. When you ask our citizens, they refer to nepotism, corruption, and political party-based appointments. We've heard about research journalism that discovered some officials who rigged the system, and they went unpunished. And when young people see this, we cannot prevent them from leaving Bosnia and Herzegovina, because we have political party controlling all the resources. Economic loss is immense. And we made a research that one young person who leaves Bosnia and Herzegovina costs 29,000 euro. If you have 100,000 persons, we have billions of euro of loss in the education system only, and it is much more than that. Ultimately, we can say that this also affected the economic ambient. We are ranking 144th in doing business index. It takes months to open a company and to register. Until 2014, we had the major investment of FDI and of financial institutions. And now when we put everything into the context, the corruption has degraded the foundations of our society. We live with this, but what can help us a lot in this COVID-19 pandemic, which revealed all our weaknesses, and this is good. I think our partners from EU, from the international community, can help us. This does not necessarily need to be financial assistance, but this can be technical assistance and to support some levels of the government. You don't necessarily need to support to entity level or national level. You should focus on those levels which will remove the overburden on doing business, and they will invest the money into a very specific project that can lead to economic recovery rather than only technical support.
The journalists are the ones who are mostly exposed to the claims that they are inventing the affairs. As a director of CIN, it's pointless for me to ask whether you were exposed to threats doing your investigative stories. I'm sure the answer is positive. You, in the Center for Investigative Journalism, do you say, people ask you, there are many of us who have never taken part into corruption. How can we help fighting corruption? What can we do? Are there instruments, mechanisms that we as individuals can use to make the society in general fight the corruption? Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here. Dennis, in the first panel, said a lot of things that I wanted to say. We share the same problems and the same fate. We are working in the same fields, so the experiences are quite expectedly very similar. We are always an object of attacks, sometimes even physical attacks, and that has become a generally accepted rule that the simplest way, after a story is published, whoever is the text about, they are not starting discussion on whether the text is based on evidence or not. The attacks start immediately. The journalists become targets, and they are often accused of working for the centers of power, that they are paid by some foreigners, that they are foreign agents, like the organizations like CIN or BiRN, since we are financed under international projects, that we are foreign agents. Then journalists are called the enemies of Bosniak Serbs or Croats because they wrote about corruption committed by one or the other or the third member of the ethnicity. And this spin is the only, it's the best way, the fastest way to divert public attention to some not so important things. And they are succeeding in this. So we remain at this level that we are working for an enemy. The journalists are there just to relay a message, and that has become recognizable, and that is what needs to be changed. Journalists are not agents of these centers of power, and journalists are not all journalists are being unprofessional in their job, and we have to break this vicious circle of accusations of journalists as enemies. We heard that there are some stories that are based on untruths that are not proven. But as the lady prosecutor said in her intervention, there are members of judiciary who are honest and doing a good job. And the same way, there are journalists who are doing a good job and doing their job professionally and in accordance with the ethics. We need to stop accusing each other. And thank you, Lady Prosecutor, for mentioning our story about buying the votes in Brčko. Yes, this is an example that proves that investigative journalism has effects, but there are many stories that have been published and there's been no response on the part of judiciary at all. And it's very symptomatic that we have much better response of the judicial bodies at the lower level, especially those outside Sarajevo or Banja Luka, the major centers. Brčko often responds to our stories. We had an excellent score in the past 2 years. All the stories that concerned Brčko, the prosecution office of Brčko started the investigation, and there was some response on the part of judiciary, but that's not something that can be said for Sarajevo, especially when it involves the crimes that we detected and proved in our stories. Nobody refuted them, nobody sued us for label, nobody said it's unfounded, but the response of especially higher judicial bodies and prosecution of Bosnia and Herzegovina was missing. or the prosecution offices at higher levels, and consequently there was no reaction on the part of the courts. We can discuss about the problems amongst the journalists, but also the problems amongst the judiciary, because that's what public expects. Somebody has already said this. If you have a lack of access to justice, people complain about long duration of processes. There are cases of high-level corruption. There is so much talk about the highest representatives of the government being involved in corruption. There is so many stories, so much evidence that's being presented to the general public, and there is no response on the part of the judiciary. So how can an ordinary citizen have confidence in judiciary? And there is another segment that tells us that there is no willingness amongst the authorities, and judiciary is a public authority because they are financed from the budget. If there is no proactive transparency nor reactive transparency, in the sense that the access to information in possession of judiciary is made very difficult in spite of all the mechanisms, you cannot find anything proactively. Anonymization of rulings that was adopted since 2011 has not contributed to opening up of judiciary to the public. You have anonymized ruling. You have a valid and binding ruling against Lejla Bičakčić. You can only find the initials LB from S from Sarajevo. And even the war crimes are being anonymized. On the other hand, we had this situation, we've been doing this continuously. We had a session of the HAPC last week where they discussed about yet another request for information. And we had the experience with the HAPC that they refuse our requests, or it takes years to give anything. And we are doing it professionally. So what can ordinary citizens do? In this whole mode of behavior the judiciary presents to the public, citizens cannot have any other perception but negative one. Yes, I know we are getting to the zone whether we will discuss whether this
Za početak par stvari, da BiH izvještaj ukazuje da ustavni okvir nije jedini problem u borbi protiv za funkcioniranje pravosuđa, integritet i borba protiv korupcije, ali
čini se da i dalje ipak imamo nekih tehničkih problema.
Evo, probali smo sad ugasiti kameru da vidimo da li se čuje bolje. Čuje se bolje? Ok. Znači, BiH izvještaj govori da ustavni okvir nije jedini problem funkcioniranja pravosuđa i borbe protiv korupcije, ali to ujedno znači da je to veliki značajan problem. Tako da to je važno spomenuti na ovakvom skupu. I htio sam reći da istraživanje među građanima i građankama prije 5-6 godina je pokazalo da su građani i građanke svjesni toga da se borba protiv kriminala i korupcije ne može uspješno voditi u ovako fragmentiranoj državi. Tako da građani su spremni na ustavne promjene nego što su to žele prikazati dio političkih elita. Ne treba zbog toga stajati u leru i dobro da se radi na svemu ovome što se može raditi u ovakvom pravnom okviru. Na primjer, izgradnja povjerenja, vraćanje povjerenja pravosuđa i pravosudnih organa, pa i izgradnja povjerenja civilnog društva i medija. Uvijek ima prostora za unapređenje. Na tome svemu treba raditi, ali mora postojati neki stol i na tom stolu se moraju nalaziti prijedlozi ustavnih promjena i o tome se mora pričati, jer je to nešto što je pred nama i značajno. Druga stvar koju sam htio reći, naš centar provodi istraživanje pomoći međunarodne vezano za COVID i onda smo ustanovili ovo što je rekla Leila, nema ni proaktivne, reaktivna je transparentnost slaba i čak je lošija nego kad smo radili istraživanje nakon poplava. Tako da ustanovilo se da to
2014. So the lack of this national mechanism for checks and controls of foreign assistance is a big problem. And since Bosnia and Herzegovina is a member of the Partnership for Open Governance, we need to find mechanisms how to implement a system of checks and controls for such assistance. And that is another, and the one other major topic are the whistleblowers. As the people who are working in the field know this, in Republika Srpska and at the state level, there are laws on whistleblowers, but is rarely implemented in the federation. We don't even have the law. It has stuck somewhere and nothing is being done. As a consequence, there are very few whistleblowers. And when somebody reports the corruption and when they raise alarm in the general public or with the media, they are faced with very dire consequences. I will mention this case of the Indirect Taxation Authority when Emir Mešić was given the status of the whistleblower, but he was not protected. The protection has failed. Yes, we heard about this. Dennis talked about this case earlier. I will ask you a very specific question. How many applications for the status of whistleblowers was received by the APIC? APIC has existed for more years than there are statuses of whistleblowers. I requested this status, but I was refused several times. You report grounds for corruption and they do not consider your goodwill. Only the civil servants can be given this status. But the people in private sectors or general member of general public, they can have the information. Mr. Sanjin Sinanovic from the central bank. It's a very complex case, disciplinary and judicially. And he was not given any help. Whether he was right or not, he should be entitled to assistance, legal, financial assistance, because it is hard for a person to be in that situation, to fight against people in power. These laws should be much broader in terms of who would be eligible for such a status. I wanted to talk about this report against the head of the investigating agency. We know that this is an intra-partisan fight, but there are mechanisms that can protect powerful people. When the report was submitted, he abused his intelligence service to identify the person who had reported him. I have grounds to suspect that this is available, this mechanism is available to other persons in power. If somebody reports them and they are high-ranking politicians or business people, they can use these instruments to learn who had reported them. Mr. Ivancic, thank you. We need to come back to the questions by our Zoom audience. Well, I did not speak for 10 minutes, I'm sorry. Well, we lost some minutes due to the technical problems, but we can always join in on some other topics during the remainder of the meeting. I want to ask the panelists here, and I see that we have Mr. Kasipovic Anton from Republika Srpska here in the audience. Minister, you saw this survey, and there is something interesting there. 97% of our respondents said that they have never reported corruption. Why is this percentage so high? Why are they reluctant to report the corruption? Can you tell us something more about your experiences?
First of all, good afternoon. And I think the regulation, the legislation on protection of persons who report corruption is a novelty in our country. And I still believe it is a good and required to encourage people to go forward with the case of corruption. In order to report corruption, you should be confident that nothing will happen to you or your dearest ones. In order that's something we all need to take care of, and this is why I believe our discussion today is crucial, and the role of all who spoke today is crucial. Without looking for arguments on individual issues to perceive one area as a bad one. I will primarily stress the role of the media. I think that the Chief Prosecutor spoke about the importance of the media, and their role is crucial, even if there are some inaccurate facts. We should not go on and say that they did the wrong thing, because this is minor when we compare their efforts and the awkward situations and frustration they face in their work. Thank you. Leila Farouk. Response in one sentence. Why 97% never reported corruption? I think because of the political control and fear, definitely fear. Now, a lot of comments from citizens came in. I will try to group them. They asked, when will something be undertaken? Because there are common people who don't have anything to do with the corruption, and we have been facing corruption every now and then, a form of corruption. Ambassador Sattler, what would be your message for these citizens?
First of all, and I get this question quite a bit, why isn't the EU, why don't the internationals in town, in Sarajevo, do more, impose? Well, my first answer is that, well, we had this, some characteristics of a protectorate right after the war with 50,000 soldiers, with OHR imposing hundreds of laws, getting rid of officials. Well, this phase is over, first of all. Now, that doesn't mean that we are not pushy. We are actually pushing on many fronts, and I get also quite a bit of criticism from lawmakers, from parties, that we are pushing too much. But to be honest, I gladly accept this blame because I believe we do this in the interest of the citizens. Let me get you one example: conflict of interest law, but also the public procurement law. Both of them have been on the table for 2 years. Nothing was happening. Now we are linking this, and this is more and more the direction we are going, because unfortunately we don't see any movement. We are linking it to our aid. So a concrete example, for the second tranche of the macro financial assistance, and this is a lot of money, this is 250 million euros to help Bosnia and Herzegovina to get through this difficult time. We demand that there is changes to the HJPC law, that there are integrity checks. This is a very concrete examples of the direction we are going. So we are increasing the pressure, and what I can only ask citizens in answering your question is, to make their voice heard, to get out there, to it's not likely that we have a quick change unless we get more of a groundswell of people, of citizens. Those hundreds of people who are with us today online, those hundreds of people who were with us last year. They need to continue and even increase their activities, get organized, ask for changes in the judiciary. Why do 97% of people don't announce any cases of corruption? Yes, it's fear. It's fear, but we've also seen that change is possible. We have seen over the last period that people actually, change can happen in this country, and this is the good thing. There is a bit of a hope at the moment. I think we should actually use that moment.
Da, hvala ambasadore. Pa svakako ja bih rekla i
Thank you, Ambassador. I think the interest of the citizens raises hopes. The fact that we made people interested and that they follow our debate is very good, is a benefit, because people have lack interest previously, and now we have their intention, their interest, and it is time for us to engage more actively. Now, I would like to round up our topic today. We will have two speakers, Mr. Paul Rahel, a member of the Parliament, and Ms. Calavera, the Directorate for Western Balkans with the EC. Mr. Calavera, can you hear us?
We can. Thank you very much. I can.
Možemo.
Gospodine Rahel.
Mr. Rahel, da li nas... Can you hear us?
Yes, I can perfectly. I hope that you can see me also well. If not, I can change my place because of the light.
It's perfect. No, sve u redu. Hvala lijepa. Izvolite, gospodine Rahel.
Thank you very much. Everything is fine, and you have the floor. We are all ears.
Thank you very much.
Hvala vam.
First, I would like to
Najprije
salute all of you.
Želim da čestitam svima vama
and also to thank European Commission
i zahvalim Europskoj komisiji
all the European
i svim
representatives that
predstavnicima Europske unije i zajednice koji
and with Bosnia and Herzegovina representatives and authorities in order to organize this conference. I must say that to talk about rule of law in this very moment of the life of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and especially when we are celebrating the 25 years of Dayton Agreement, is crucial. Why? Because Dayton Agreement 25 years ago was the beginning of the beginning. And what I think Bosnia and citizens as a whole, all the communities, and also the very, very tiny minorities were expecting is that this beginning should not last for eternity. And so we should open a new chapter for the future generations and for the generations that have known this very, very tragic history of war and of conflict, still of some tensions. And what I'd say is that the only way of ending the beginning, to open the new phase, to open the new chapter, is naturally to, I'd say, fasten or to accelerate the path towards European Union accession. When Bosnia and Herzegovina has the status of candidate to the European Union, we can say that the Dayton Agreement is already fulfilled in all its first purposes. And now we have in the hands of the Bosnian people, of the Bosnian communities, the future of Bosnia. And that is the reason why rule of law is so crucial. Because I must say, I have to say in a very frank manner, but also in a very amicable, friendly, I'd say even very, very close, very, very near to the people and the citizens of Bosnia. All the matters that are related with rule of law, transparency, accountability, independence of judicial power, the impartiality of this high judiciary council, the capacity to create trust in citizens, all these dimensions of rule of law, the separation of powers, the freedom of media, the pluralism in the society, that are naturally aspects, very important aspects of rule of law. All these together are targets that can be met in a reasonable time. I believe that, for instance, education reforms, health reforms, economic reforms, they need too much time to be, I'd say, completely fulfilled, to be completely developed. But these institutional or even constitutional reforms, they only need political will and also some capacity to deliver, capacity, skill to implement. So it depends on the will of the political class, of the politicians, of the representatives of Bosnian people, of Bosnia and Herzegovina as a state. And this is something that you have all the skills and all the capacity to do in the next year. It's not so difficult. We don't have to invent the wheel. You can do it if you look at the examples of other countries. If you look at several reports that were produced, that were made in the last 4 or 5 years, the Commission of Venice, the Council of Europe, European Commission, European Parliament, so many NGOs and institutions that really care about the future of Bosnia. In these respects, of the independence of judicial power, of the impartiality of judges, of the governance structure, I'd say the governance of the judicial system, the accountability, the transparency, all these, the fight against corruption, all these reforms, they can be made in a reasonable time. And if this political will is clear, if there is the capacity to deliver and to implement these reforms in a quite, I'd say, not even long, quite short period, then we can move forward and we can give a major step, that is to have the status of candidacy. And this is a process where things are linked. If we do the reforms, then if you have the status of candidate, is easier to keep the reforms, to keep the reforming path, to keep the reforming energy, to keep the reforming dynamism. I know that from my own country. What was Portugal before European Union? All the reforms that we had to make in order to join. And then when we joined, first as candidates and then as members, in every step, things were going faster and deeper, and people live today much better than before. So there's no reason to delays, to try to delay the pace. No, I know these reforms on the judicial system, on accountability, on transparency of public administration, on structures to fight corruption, they are very profound. They are really deep, but we can do it without taking too much time. So we have an horizon that is a practical one. And this is the major effort that I think that Bosnian authorities should make in order to grant that they create such a trust and such an expectation that the European Union is ready to acknowledge the candidate status. And if we achieve this point, things will evolve in a very positive, constructive, hopeful manner in the near future. And that is the reason why I say, now is the time to complete, to finish, to end the beginning that was the Dayton Agreement status quo. And that is creating a new target, a new horizon, a new purpose, a new atmosphere and environment where the young generations, where the citizens from all the religions, from all the ethnic backgrounds, from even the very small minorities, they can see themselves, they can identify themselves with the spirit of these reforms, that are reforms towards democracy and towards rule of law. And let me tell you, what we are expecting, and I'm finishing my intervention, from you, from the stakeholders, is not something that we don't expect from European Union members. You know very well that now the main discussion among the 27 members is exactly if they should assess, if they should evaluate the rule of law inside each member state or not. So we are not asking something to Bosnian Herzegovinian state authorities, leaders, stakeholders, that we are not asking also for ourselves. I always say the right place of Bosnia-Herzegovina is Europe, because Bosnia-Herzegovina, with its diversity, that is a richness of religions, of ethnic backgrounds, of even ways of thinking, of political parties and so on, is a kind of a summary of European Union. European Union is about all these things: diversity of the peoples, differences, respecting all these differences, to integrate them, to create a model of governance where everybody has the same rights and has the same capacity to intervene, to be an active citizen, to have also the benefits and the rights that the social welfare state of member states provides. And so I believe that the best way of commemorating Dayton and of creating a new horizon, a new hope, a new, I'd say, landscape to the political and to the constitutional framework of Bosnia-Herzegovina is really to address the issues of rule of law. All of them. They are in the 14 key priorities. If you are able to do that, and it is not so difficult, I can assure you, if you are able to do that, I believe that the candidate status will come quite soon. immediately after that. And then a new era, a new hope will be built. And this is what the citizens, what the people, what the ordinary people of all Bosnia and Herzegovina territory are expecting. They are expecting you to deliver. And when you deliver, European Union will be obliged to deliver. And I believe that we can build finally an horizon of hope, of prosperity, of development of the country that can grant to the Bosnian citizens the same rights, the same aspirations of all Europeans, and I should say, in a very, very broad manner, the same aspirations that each human being, wherever in the world, should also benefit from. Thank you very much. And I want to say, please do your job. And then you'll see that this will be rewarded with good news for all the Bosnians. Thank you very much.
Hvala gospodine Rahela. Što ste nam...
Thank you, Mr. Angel. Perhaps it would be good if you can come to several parliaments that we have in Bosnia and Herzegovina and to explain it to them that it's not a big thing to reform the system, that it requires political will and a short period of time, and all good things would come. And perhaps you could come and talk to them into more details. Maybe you will be able to tell them that it's not so complicated and the good things would follow. So in the end, after almost 3 hours, we have our last guest, Ms. Caladera. We remember her from the previous debate.
Putem Zooma, da li nas čujete?
Good morning. I'm very delighted to be here addressing all of you in this concluding remarks. Let me once again underline the importance of this rule of law debate that has managed to participants and citizens from across Bosnia and Herzegovina and the European Union to discuss this very important topic. And this, despite the restrictions posed by the pandemic, you have really managed to have together a very vibrant online debate on the rule of law priorities for this country. This is a remarkable achievement. I want to thank the distinguished speakers from civil society organizations, from new institutions, like, of course, the distinguished member of parliament, Mr. Rangel, from member states, from organizations, and fellow judges from Europe and judicial office holders from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I want in particular as well to thank all the citizens from Bosnia and Herzegovina that both directly today in this online platform, but also through the results of the countrywide surveys on the rule of law, have really, they are contributing to the success of this debate. Let me recall this morning, Commissioner Kelly has said in his intervention that Bosnia and Herzegovina has a clear EU perspective, but it's political leaders that need to lead by example and embrace with more determination the European values so that this European perspective can be accelerated. And I think it's important to recall as well the intervention from the German ambassador, Mrs. Weber, when she really said that this is not only an important new value, which is indispensable, of course, for your accession, but it's really the basic of the Bosnia-Herzegovina constitution. So I'm very the discussion really underlined how important it is to set the highest integrity example for the society at large. And I appreciated the remarks by the judge, Jose Greja Matos, that he argued that judiciary must have a fundamental commitment to the value of integrity. And I really like the metaphor he used. Integrity is like the air we breathe. And today we know that in particular in winter, the air we breathe is not very clean in the region.
Ovo je obstrukcija.
The air of the region. We need to clean the different practices that don't contribute to integrity. The panel has exposed the moral, the social, and the economic damage of corruption. And as well, something very important, that the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the civil society actors, the journalists need to feel safe in reporting cases of corruption, being able to do whistleblowing, and that, so that those cases can be properly followed through by the authorities. I think it's very important as well to listen to the very good advice that Mr. Gianluca Esposito, the Executive Secretary of GRECO, has given in terms of possible solutions that are based, of course, on EU standards. And here I would like as well to recall something that, of course, the Minister of Justice of Austria, Mrs. Sadi, had put this very, very visual metaphor as well, how corruption is the cancer of the economy and the society. So we have to really combat this moral disease, which of course affects us all. I would like to say that, of course, the greatest achievement of this debate is that citizens have had the chance to be heard by the authorities. And in this sense, this debate that we have today is as well an exercise of accountability. I would want to thank particularly the authorities who were present and engaged in the debate. I really thank them for being with us, but as well, I strongly encourage the rest of the authorities not to shy away from this engagement. At the end of the debate, the message from citizens is clear. Change towards integrity and eradication of corruption need to start now. There is no more time to lose. Let me be clear, the European Commission insists so much on integrity reforms. And I think your Ambassador Sattler has been very clear, not only we,
Ambassador Sattler je bio jako jasan.
we're asking as well that our substantive financial contribution to these countries, which are of course unprecedented as well in the context of helping the country move forward in these difficult conditions, that are as well linked to a better response from the country authorities in delivering what needs to be delivered. And I would like to quote our transatlantic partners, of course, our US partners, and in particular, I would like to quote President J.F. Kennedy, that really talk about why reforms are important. And reforms are important not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And it is through hard work and commitment that we can, eradicate corruption and establish a true culture of integrity in the judiciary, public office, and society at large. This is why we in the European Union, we pay particular attention to these issues very early on the accession process, to allow potential candidate countries such as Bosnia and Herzegovina to put in place all the necessary reforms and to advance in their implementation soon enough. I regret, I have to admit that unfortunately after years of efforts, we still have important gaps and weaknesses that remain in the rule of law chain in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Let me point, among other documents, to the 2019 Commission opinion on Bosnia's accession, or to the experts' reports on the rule of law issue that everybody knows as the Mr. Prieb report. These documents describe in the most vivid manner how deep some of these shortcomings are and how urgent the reforms need to be tackled. For Bosnia and Herzegovina to advance in its EU path, we need to see that reforms more vigorously implemented and implemented in a way that produces a real positive impact on the everyday life of the citizens. Make no mistakes, those reforms are not for us in Brussels. Those are for the benefits of the citizens of this country. Citizens in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and especially young generations, deserve a chance, a real chance to develop professionally their life and their families at home. And I was very touched when Farouk Hadid mentioned how migration of the youth of this country is costing millions to the economy. I think if we want the youngsters to stay in Bosnia and Herzegovina, corruption must be eradicated. Justice must serve better the citizens of these countries. So trust is rebuilt that you can have a better future in this country. This year record on Bosnia and Herzegovina rule of law reforms has been particularly concerning. The Commission has found there was no progress in this sector. And even more regretfully, we have found that integrity reforms have been met with resistance by the judiciary and by politicians at the highest levels. The Commission has also found that corruption remained widespread in the country at all levels of government. And we have seen that signs of political capture that really affect on a daily basis the life of the citizens. These evident signs of deterioration require urgent measures because we need to rebuild citizens' trust. We have been very clear in our recommendations. As a first step, the country needs to restore citizens' trust in the judiciary, a credible and rigorous system of verification of financial statements of judges and prosecutors and members of the High Judicial and Prosecutorial Council must be urgently put in place. The establishment of this system is key to combat corruption in the judiciary and ensure that judiciary decisions are not tainted by pressure or by conflict of interest, but that they are taken in full independence and free of undue influence. Currently, judges and prosecutors do not undergo any thorough integrity and ethical assessment before taking office. This seriously hampers the integrity of the judiciary and the rule of law in the country. To ensure its credibility, the process must allow a close monitoring of its functioning and enforcement by experts of the European Union. Let me reassure you, monitoring by experts from EU member states does not aim to replace Bosnia and Herzegovina magistrates. Quite the contrary. Such monitoring aims to support and to empower the integrity unit within the High Judicial and Prosecutorial Council to do its best to reinforce integrity and to fight corruption within the judiciary. This will alleviate concerns about potential abuse and manipulation and will strengthen public trust in the process. It will also be a chance for the Bosnia and Herzegovina magistrate to prove their commitment to the principle of judicial cooperation and mutual trust, which is an essential element of the European common space of justice and security. This is the way we work in the European Union. Let me be absolutely clear. Pending a new law of the HJPC, of the High Judicial and Prosecutorial Council, and pending a new law on courts, the adoption of these integrity amendments to the HJPC law is a litmus test for the credibility of Bosnia and Herzegovina's commitment to the reform of the judiciary in line with European standards. Delaying the adoption of the integrity amendments would further demonstrate persisting political obstruction to the judicial reform and the fight against corruption. Continued lack of result and resistance to the establishment of a meaningful system of integrity checks in the judiciary will be reflected in the Commission decision on further financial support and will also have an impact on the future Commission recommendations. Other important reforms are also pending, but please let me emphasize again, the credibility of the system is at stake, and we have a very important step ahead of us by adopting the integrity amendments. There are other reforms that are also pending, and they are very important as well. This is the law of conflict of interest and of public procurement. This must be also finalized and adopted without further delay in line with European standards. I have really a very important message for everybody right now, to politicians and to the judiciary. Please act constructively and not obstruct, because obstruction to reforms undermine your citizens' rights. The European Commission really can only advise you. We can only encourage you. We can only support you to advance on these reforms. But the decisions remain with elected representatives of these countries and with its citizens. The public debate aims to put the spotlight of some of the most urgent and needed reforms in the area of the rule of law that we have today is a step in the right direction. But I encourage the leaders to act now. I also encourage the citizens to remain engaged and committed to bringing the reforms forward. Most notably, we have now the established rule of law platform, which will continue to engage with civil society in this area. You can count that the European Commission will stand by your side, by the side of every single citizen of Bosnia and Herzegovina on your European path. We count on you. We need you so that we can continue this journey together. I really appreciate your time and your attention. My opening address is closed now. Thank you.
Hvala, hvala gospođo Calavera. Evo.
Thank you, Ms. Calavera. Thank you, dear panelists, dear audience. We had 200 followers on Zoom platform, some 24,000 on Facebook. I am sorry that we didn't have time to answer all the questions, all the comments. This is an encouragement to the organizational team to do things like this perhaps even more often. I hope the next time when we meet in a similar event, for all of you who were watching us and the officials from the EU, from Brussels, and the officials from Bosnia and Herzegovina, that we'll have some better numbers, that instead of 2/3 of citizens who do not trust our judiciary, we'll have 2/3 of those who do. That instead of 90% of people thinking that nothing good has been achieved in judiciary, will think the opposite, that good things have happened. I think it's in the interest of all of us who live here and who love this country. I send best wishes to you all, to wish us all to be wise and to protect everybody's health of our own and of our closest ones. Thank you.